The dust-choked stage rattled into Deer Lodge, Montana territory, on a sweltering August afternoon in 1884, carrying a woman whose wedding dress was 3 states behind her, and whose tangled auburn hair had not seen a brush in 6 days. Nora Whitmore pressed her forehead against the window frame, watching the small frontier town materialize through the haze of heat and exhaustion. She had left Ohio as a mail-order bride, traveling west with her heart full of cautious hope and her trunk full of carefully folded linens. The man who was supposed to meet her in Butte had taken one look at her stepping off the train, his face twisting with undisguised disgust, and turned on his heel without a single word. She had stood there on that platform for 2 hours, clutching her traveling bag, before the station master gently explained that Mr. Hendricks had already purchased a ticket back to his ranch and would not be returning. "Deer Lodge is just down the line," the station master had said, his weathered face kind beneath his cap. "Got a boarding house there. Mrs. Chen takes in ladies sometimes, gives them work while they figure things out." So Nora had climbed back aboard, spending the last of her carefully saved coins on the fare. And now here she was in another strange town with 53 cents to her name, and hair so knotted and matted from days of travel, and tears that she could barely turn her head without wincing. She had tried to work a comb through it in the cramped stage, but the teeth had snapped clean off, and she had given up, too defeated to care any more. The stage lurched to a stop outside the Wells Fargo office. Nora gathered her bag and stepped down into the Montana heat, squinting against the bright sun reflecting off the false-fronted buildings. Deer Lodge was larger than she had expected, with a main street that stretched a good quarter-mile, lined with mercantiles, saloons, a bank, and what looked like a decent-sized hotel. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow even in summer. "Miss Whitmore." She turned to find a small Chinese woman approaching, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her dress practical and clean. "Mrs. Chen?" "Yes. The station master in Butte sent a telegram. You need a place to stay." Her English was accented but clear, her eyes sharp and assessing but not unkind. "I do. Though I must be honest with you, I have very little money. I can work. I am not afraid of hard work." Nora's voice caught slightly. She had been repeating these words to herself for the last 100 miles. Mrs. Chen looked her over, taking in the wrinkled traveling dress, the dusty shoes, and the impossibly tangled mass of hair that had begun to form actual knots near the base of Nora's skull. "You look like you have been through something. Come, we will talk over tea." The boarding house was a tidy 2-story building just off Main Street, with whitewashed walls and blue shutters. Inside, it smelled of ginger and soap. Mrs. Chen led Nora to a small parlor and disappeared, returning with a teapot and 2 cups. "Tell me what happened, Mrs. Chen said, pouring the tea with steady hands. Nora found herself explaining everything. The advertisement in the Cleveland newspaper, the careful correspondence with Mr. Hendricks, the promises he had made about his prosperous ranch, his need for a good Christian wife, his assurances that he valued character over beauty, the humiliating rejection at the Butte station, the way he had looked at her as though she were something spoiled he had accidentally purchased. "Did he say why?" Mrs. Chen asked quietly. "He did not need to. I know what he saw." Nora touched her hair self-consciously. "My mother always said I was too plain, too tall, too thin, hair the color of rust, face full of freckles. Mr. Hendricks wanted a pretty ornament for his home, and I was not what he imagined." "Mr. Hendricks is a fool," Mrs. Chen said firmly, "but that is his loss. Now you must decide what you will do." "I will work. Anything honest. I can cook and clean, sew and mend. I am strong and I learn quickly." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. "I can give you a room in exchange for help with the house, but you should know Deer Lodge is a small town, not many opportunities for a woman alone. However, there is a rancher who comes to town every week for supplies. Ezra Zimmerman. He has been looking for someone to help with his household. His mother passed this spring and the place has fallen into disorder. He is a good man but proud. He will not ask directly for help. What sort of help does he need? Cooking, cleaning, mending. His ranch is 2 hours from town. He would provide room and board and fair wages. But you would be alone out there with him, and people talk. You would need to decide if you can bear that." Nora thought of the 53 cents in her reticule, of the long journey west that had brought her exactly nowhere. "I can bear a great many things, Mrs. Chen. Gossip does not frighten me. Then I will speak to him when he comes to town. In the meantime, you rest and recover, and we will do something about that hair." But the hair proved more challenging than either woman had anticipated. When Nora finally sat down and unpinned the mass, Mrs. Chen gasped. Days of travel, of sleeping upright in cramped stages, of tears and dust and neglect, had transformed Nora's long auburn hair into a disaster of tangles and knots. The back was matted into a solid mass that pulled painfully at her scalp. "We might need to cut it," Mrs. Chen said gently. "No." The word came out sharper than Nora intended. "I know it is foolish vanity, but my hair is all I have. My grandmother on my mother's side had hair this color. It is the only beautiful thing about me when it is properly cared for. If we cut it now, I will lose even that small thing." Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment. "Then we will try, but it will take time and patience." They spent 2 hours that evening working at the tangles with gentle fingers and warm water scented with lavender. Mrs. Chen managed to work loose some of the smaller knots, but the large matted section at the back remained stubbornly locked, and every attempt to work a comb through it brought tears to Nora's eyes. "We will try again tomorrow," Mrs. Chen said finally. "These things cannot be rushed." 3 days later, Ezra Zimmerman came to town. Nora was sweeping the front steps of the boarding house when she saw him ride past on a big sorrel gelding, heading toward the mercantile. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and shoulders that spoke of years of hard physical work. His face was weathered and serious, deeply tanned, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30, and he rode with the easy confidence of a man who spent more time in the saddle than on his feet. "That is Mr. Zimmerman, Mrs. Chen said, appearing at Nora's elbow. "I will speak to him today." Nora watched him dismount and tie his horse to the rail outside the mercantile. He moved with deliberate economy, no wasted motion. And even from a distance, she could sense a kind of loneliness about him, a man going through the motions of a life that had lost its center. Mrs. Chen approached him while he was loading supplies into his saddlebags an hour later. Nora watched from the boarding house window, trying not to feel like her entire future hung on this conversation. She saw Mrs. Chen speaking, saw the rancher shake his head at first, then pause and listen more carefully. Finally, he glanced toward the boarding house and Nora stepped back from the window, heart hammering. 10 minutes later, Mrs. Chen returned. "He will meet with you tomorrow morning here. He is staying at the hotel tonight." Nora barely slept. She wore her best dress, the dark blue one with the white collar that she had saved for her wedding day but never worn. Mrs. Chen had managed to work free a few more tangles, but the hair was still a disaster, and finally Nora simply twisted it up and pinned it as best she could, ignoring the painful pull at her scalp. Ezra Zimmerman arrived precisely at 9, hat in hand. Up close, Nora could see that his eyes were a striking dark green, the color of pine trees, and his face, though serious, had a gentleness to it that eased her nerves slightly. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice low and measured. "Mrs. Chen tells me you are looking for work." "I am, Mr. Zimmerman. I am a hard worker, and I am told you need help with your household." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I will be plain with you. My ranch is small, just 300 acres, and I run about 200 head of cattle. I do all the ranch work myself, with help from 2 hands who have their own cabin on the property. My mother ran the household until she passed in April. Since then, things have gotten away from me. The house needs a thorough cleaning, my clothes need mending, and I cannot cook anything beyond beans and bacon. I need someone who can restore order and provide decent meals. I can offer room and board in the main house, your own bedroom with a lock on the door, and $20 a month. Mrs. Chen tells me your situation is difficult, and that you are willing to accept a position that might cause talk in town. Mr. Zimmerman, I traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man who rejected me at first sight. I have nothing to return to in Ohio and no family to shelter me. If people want to talk, they will talk regardless of what I do. I need honest work, and you are offering it. I accept your terms." Something flickered in his eyes. Not pity exactly, but understanding. The man in butt was a fool. Nora blinked, surprised by the direct statement. "I mean no disrespect, Miss Whitmore, but any man who judges a woman's worth by her face is not fit to marry. I am offering you employment, nothing more. But I want you to know that you will be treated with respect in my home. I keep my word, and I expect others to do the same. Can you be ready to leave this afternoon?" "I can be ready within the hour," he nodded. "I will return at noon with a wagon. Pack what you need." After he left, Nora sat down heavily in one of Mrs. Chen's kitchen chairs, her hands shaking with relief and residual fear. Mrs. Chen pressed a cup of tea into her hands. "He is a good man," Mrs. Chen said. "Quiet, keeps to himself, but fair. You will be safe with him." "Thank you," Nora whispered, "for everything. When you have saved some money, come visit, and we will work on that hair together." Mrs. Chen smiled, a rare thing that lit up her entire face. At noon, Ezra returned with a sturdy wagon pulled by a matched pair of bay horses. He loaded Nora's single trunk without comment, then helped her up onto the bench seat. As they rolled out of Deer Lodge, Nora looked back at the small town that had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, and she said a silent prayer that this new path would lead somewhere better than the last. The ride to the Zimmerman ranch took them west along a dusty road that climbed gradually into the foothills. The landscape was breathtaking, all rolling grassland dotted with sage and wildflowers, with the peaks of the Flint Creek Range rising blue and distant to the west. The sky was enormous, arching overhead in a dome of perfect azure, and the air smelled of dust and pine, and something else Nora could not name, something wild and clean and utterly different from the sooty air of Cleveland. Ezra drove in silence, his hands steady on the reins, his attention on the road. Nora did not try to force conversation. She was learning that he was a man who spoke only when he had something to say, and she found it restful after days of Mrs. Chen's kind but constant questions. They passed several smaller ranches, marked by weathered fences and distant buildings. Once, they saw a herd of pronghorn antelope racing across the prairie, their white rumps flashing in the sun, and Nora caught her breath at the sight. "Beautiful, are they not?" Ezra said, surprising her. "I have never seen anything like them. Montana is full of wonders, you just have to slow down enough to notice." He glanced at her. "You are from Ohio, Cleveland. I worked in a textile factory before I came west. Hard work. Yes, long hours, little pay, and the air full of lint. But it was work, and I was grateful for it." He nodded, seeming to understand. My father came west in '67, right after the war, claimed this land and built everything from nothing. He died when I was 15, and I have been running the place since. It is not an easy life, but it is honest." "That is all I want," Nora said quietly. "An honest life." The Zimmerman ranch appeared as they crested a low hill. The main house was a solid log structure, single-story but sprawling, with a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. There was a large barn, a corral with several horses, a chicken coop, and in the distance, a smaller cabin that she assumed housed the ranch hands Ezra had mentioned. The setting was beautiful, nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered slopes, with a creek running silver through the meadow. But as they drew closer, Nora could see the signs of neglect. The porch sagged slightly, weeds choked the path to the door, and through the windows she could see curtains hanging crooked. Ezra saw her looking. "I told you it had gotten away from me," he said, his voice tight with something that might have been shame. "It is nothing that cannot be fixed with work and time," Nora replied. He pulled the wagon up to the porch and set the brake, then jumped down and came around to help her down. His hands were calloused and strong, and he set her down as easily as if she weighed nothing. "Let me show you the house," he said, taking her trunk on his shoulder. Inside, the house was dim and smelled of dust and old smoke. The main room was large, with a stone fireplace at one end and a kitchen area at the other. Doors led off to what Nora assumed were bedrooms. The furniture was heavy and well-made but covered in dust. Dishes were piled in the dry sink. Books and papers were scattered across a table. It was the home of a man who had stopped caring about his surroundings. "Your room is here," Ezra said, pushing open a door off the main room. The bedroom was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. The bed had fresh linens, and Nora realized he must have made it up that morning before coming to town. "The lock is here," he said, pointing to a sturdy bolt on the inside of the door. "I sleep in the room at the other end of the house. The ranch hands, Tom and Billy, have their own place and take their meals there unless I call them up for something special. You will have privacy here." "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. Call me Ezra. We will be living under the same roof. No need for formality." He set her trunk down at the foot of the bed. "I will leave you to settle in. When you are ready, come out and I will show you the rest." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Nora sat on the bed and took a long, shaky breath. She had a roof over her head. She had work. She was safe. The knot of fear that had been living in her chest since but loosened slightly. She stood and unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 spare dresses on pegs, placing her undergarments and stockings in the drawers. At the bottom of the trunk was the photograph of her grandmother, the only family memento she had brought west. She set it on top of the chest of drawers, and the old woman's stern face seemed to approve of this rough room, this new beginning. When she emerged, Ezra was standing by the kitchen table, looking lost. "I thought I should start with a meal," Nora said. "If you can show me where things are." Relief crossed his face so plainly that Nora felt a pang of sympathy. He showed her the pantry, which was well stocked with basics, the root cellar with its stores of potatoes and carrots and onions, the chicken coop where she could gather eggs. The cook stove was a good one, better than she had expected, and she soon had a fire going and water heating. Ezra disappeared outside to tend to the horses and whatever other chores occupied him, and Nora set to work. She made a simple supper of fried potatoes and onions, eggs scrambled with herbs she found growing wild near the porch, and biscuits from scratch. It felt good to work with her hands to create order from chaos. When she called him in for supper, Ezra stopped in the doorway and stared at the table she had set, the food steaming on plates, the coffee poured into clean cups. I had forgotten what this looked like, he said quietly. They ate in comfortable silence, the only sounds the clink of forks on plates and the ticking of the clock on the mantel. The food was simple but good, and Ezra ate with the appetite of a man who had been living on beans and bacon for too long. "Thank you," he said when he had finished. "That was the best meal I have had in months. It was only eggs and potatoes. It was more than that." He stood and carried his plate to the dry sink, then hesitated. "Miss Whitmore, your hair." Nora's hand went automatically to the painful mass pinned at the back of her head. "I know it is a mess. I have been trying to work the tangles out, but some of them are beyond my reach and I have no one to help." Ezra was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My mother used to say that tangled hair needs patience and gentle hands. If you would permit it, I could try to help. I am not offering out of pity, but because I can see it pains you, and there is no reason for unnecessary pain." Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks. The offer was so unexpected, so intimate, that she did not know how to respond. But the matted hair had been pulling at her scalp for days, and she was desperate enough to accept help from any quarter. "That is kind of you," she said carefully, "but it is truly a disaster. You might regret the offer. Let me be the judge of that. Wait here." He disappeared into his room and returned with a wooden box. Inside was a boar bristle brush, a wide-toothed comb, and a small bottle of oil. "These were my mother's," he said. "She had long hair her whole life, said the secret was oil and patience." Nora slowly reached up and began removing the pins from her hair, her fingers trembling slightly. When the mass finally fell down her back, she heard Ezra draw in a breath. The tangled section was worse than he had expected, she was sure. "Sit in that chair," he said, pointing to one of the kitchen chairs. "Turn your back to the light." Nora sat, her heart hammering. She could feel him standing behind her, could sense his hesitation. Then his fingers touched her hair carefully, gently separating a small section from the rest. "Tell me if I hurt you," he said. He worked with the concentration of a man performing delicate surgery. Starting at the very ends of her hair, he used his fingers to separate individual strands, working out the smallest tangles first. When he encountered a knot too tight to pull apart with fingers alone, he added a drop of oil and worked at it patiently until it loosened. He did not yank or force. He simply persisted, gentle and methodical. Nora sat very still, her eyes closed, feeling the pull and release as her hair slowly came free. No one had touched her with such care in longer than she could remember. Her mother had been impatient with her daughter's thick hair, yanking the brush through it and scolding Nora when she cried. But Ezra's hands were steady and kind, and gradually Nora felt herself relaxing under his ministrations. "You have beautiful hair," he said after a while, his voice quiet. "The color of autumn leaves. My mother called it the color of rust. Your mother was wrong." They fell silent again, and Ezra continued to work. The sun set beyond the windows, painting the mountains gold and purple, and Nora lit a lamp to give him light to see by. Still he worked, patient and tireless, until finally the worst of the tangles were free and he could run the brush through her hair in long, smooth strokes. "There," he said at last. "Much better." Nora reached back and touched her hair, amazed. It fell smooth and wavy down her back, free of pain for the first time in over a week. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know how to thank you properly. You cooked me a good meal, we are even." He set the brush back in the box. "You must be tired, you should rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to begin the real work." Nora stood, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment had been, this rancher she barely knew brushing out her hair in the lamplight. "Good night, Mr. Zimmerman." "Ezra." "Good night, Miss Whitmore." "Nora." "If you are to be Ezra, then I should be Nora." He nodded, a small smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Good night, Nora." In her room, Nora carefully braided her hair for sleeping, marveling at how easily her fingers moved through it now. She lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, the horses moving in the corral, the wind in the pines, and somewhere far off, a coyote calling to the moon. She felt safe here, safer than she had in months, and that night she slept deeply and dreamlessly for the first time since leaving Ohio. The next morning, Nora woke to the sound of Ezra moving around in the kitchen. She dressed quickly and emerged to find him making coffee, his movements awkward and inefficient. "Let me," she said, taking over the pot. "You go do whatever you need to do outside. I will have breakfast ready in half an hour." He looked relieved. "I usually head out just after dawn to check the herd. If you need anything, ring the bell on the porch and I will come." After he left, Nora surveyed the kitchen properly in daylight. It was even worse than she had thought the night before, with grime on every surface and a disturbing smell coming from behind the stove. She would need to do a thorough cleaning, but first, food. She made a breakfast of hot cakes and bacon, fried eggs and fresh coffee, and when Ezra returned an hour later streaked with dust and sweat, he ate like a man starving. "I will be working in the south pasture today," he said, "mending fence. Will you be all right here alone?" "I have a great deal to do. I will be occupied." He nodded and stood to leave, then hesitated. "Your hair. Would you like me to brush it again this evening? The tangles may return if we do not keep after them." Nora felt that flutter in her chest again, half nerves and half something else. "If it is not too much trouble." "No trouble." After he left, Nora tied her hair back in a kerchief and set to work. She started with the kitchen, scrubbing every surface, washing every dish, sweeping and mopping until the floor shone. Behind the stove, she found the source of the smell, a dead mouse that had been there for weeks, and she disposed of it with grim efficiency. The pantry needed organizing, the linens needed washing, the windows needed cleaning. She worked steadily through the day, pausing only for a quick lunch of bread and cheese. By the time Ezra returned in the late afternoon, the main room of the house had been transformed. The windows sparkled, the floors gleamed, and the smell of lye soap and sunshine had replaced the odor of neglect. "Good Lord," Ezra said, stopping in the doorway. "I had forgotten the place could look like this." "It is a good house," Nora said, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "It just needed some attention." That evening, after another simple supper, Ezra took out the wooden box again. This time, Nora sat without being asked, and he began brushing her hair with the same patient gentleness as the night before. He worked from the ends up, careful not to pull, adding drops of oil where needed. "Tell me about Cleveland," he said as he worked. So Nora talked, telling him about the factory where she had worked, the rows of women at their machines, the deafening noise and the lint-filled air. She told him about her tiny rented room, about saving every penny for nearly 2 years to afford the train ticket west. She did not tell him about her mother's death 3 years past, the relief she had felt mixed with the guilt. Some things were too raw to speak aloud yet. "And you?" she asked. "You said your father came west after the war. He fought for the Union, came back changed. My mother said he could not settle down to city life again, so they packed up and came west looking for space and silence. They claimed this land, built this house with their own hands. I was born in this room you are sitting in. My mother delivered me with only my father's help and a book of medical advice." He paused in his brushing. "She was strong, my mother, the strongest person I ever knew. When my father died, she kept the ranch running. Taught me everything about cattle and horses and land. When she got sick this spring, it happened so fast. Pneumonia. 2 weeks from the first cough to the end, I was not ready to lose her. "I am sorry," Nora said quietly. "She would have liked you. She always said a woman who could work was worth 10 who could not." He finished brushing and set the brush aside. "There. Better." Nora reached back and felt the silky weight of her hair, free of tangles and smooth. "Much better, thank you. Same time tomorrow?" "Yes." It became their evening ritual. Each day, Nora would work on restoring order to the ranch house, and Ezra would work the land, checking cattle, mending fences, moving irrigation lines. They would eat supper together, talking a little more each night, learning the shapes of each other's stories. And then Ezra would brush Nora's hair in the lamplight, his touch careful and steady, while they spoke of small things and large, building a friendship strand by strand. Nora learned that Ezra loved the land with a passion that bordered on reverence, that he could read weather in the morning sky and knew every spring and creek on his property. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable, and that he carried grief for his mother like a stone in his chest. Ezra learned that Nora was smart and observant, that she noticed everything and forgot nothing. He learned that she sang softly to herself while she worked, old hymns and folk songs in a clear, pretty voice. He learned that she had come west not to escape poverty, but loneliness, and that the rejection in Butte had wounded her more deeply than she wanted to admit. The weeks passed. Summer deepened into late August, and the work of the ranch continued its steady rhythm. Nora transformed the house room by room, scrubbing and organizing, mending and repairing. She planted a small kitchen garden near the house, starting late but hopeful for fall vegetables. She made friends with the chickens and learned to milk the cow Ezra kept for house use. The ranch hands, Tom and Billy, came up to the main house one Sunday for dinner, and Nora made a feast of roasted chicken and potatoes, fresh bread and berry pie, and the two weather-beaten cowboys thanked her so profusely that she blushed. "Best meal we have had in a year, madam," Tom said, his weathered face split in a grin. "Mr. Zimmerman is lucky to have you here." After they left, Ezra helped Nora wash the dishes, a comfortable silence between them. But as they finished, he said quietly, "Tom is right. I am lucky you are here. This place feels like a home again." Nora's heart kicked hard in her chest. "I am glad to be here." Their eyes met over the dishpan, and for a moment something hung in the air between them, unspoken but present. Then Ezra looked away and cleared his throat. "Your hair," he said. "Yes." She sat, and he began to brush, and the moment passed. But it had been there, real and undeniable. September came, and with it the first whispers of autumn in the air. The aspen trees on the mountainsides began to turn gold, and the mornings carried a chill that burned off by noon. Ezra spent long days moving cattle to lower pastures in preparation for winter, and he came home exhausted and dusty. But he never failed to appear in the kitchen after supper with the wooden box. Nora found herself living for those evening hours. The work of the day was satisfying, but it was in those quiet times with Ezra that she felt most alive. His hands in her hair had become familiar, comforting, and yet every touch sent a little shiver through her that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with a hunger she was trying hard not to name. She knew she was falling in love with him. It was impossible not to. He was kind and steady and honest, everything the man in Butte had not been. He treated her with respect and gentleness, but more than that, he saw her. Really saw her. Not the plain face or the rusty hair, but the person underneath. But Nora was afraid. He had hired her as a housekeeper, nothing more. He had never indicated that he thought of her in any other way, and she could not bear the thought of another rejection, another man looking at her and finding her wanting. One evening in mid-September, as Ezra brushed her hair, he said, "Nora, I need to ask you something." Her heart stopped. Yes, the church social is next Saturday in town. I usually skip these things, but Mrs. Chen sent word that she would like to see you. I thought we might go just for an hour or two. Let people see that you are well and settled. Of course, I would like to see Mrs. Chen. There will be talk, he warned. You living out here with me, no chaperone, some people will assume things. Let them assume. I know the truth, and so do you. The truth, he repeated softly. He set down the brush and came around to face her. What is the truth, Nora? She looked up at him, her heart hammering. His green eyes were searching her face, and she saw vulnerability there, a question he was almost afraid to ask. The truth is that I came here as your housekeeper, she said carefully, and I remain grateful for the work and the home you have provided. He nodded slowly, and something in his expression closed off. I see. Yes, of course. He stepped back. I should turn in. Morning comes early. After he left, Nora sat alone in the lamplight, cursing herself. She had seen the question in his eyes and been too cowardly to answer it honestly. She had hidden behind formality and gratitude when what she wanted to say was something entirely different. The week crawled past. Ezra was polite but distant, and he did not offer to brush her hair. Nora felt the loss of it like a physical ache, but she did not know how to cross the gulf that had opened between them. Saturday arrived, bright and clear. They rode to Deer Lodge in the wagon, sitting side by side but not touching, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. The church social was held in the community hall, and it seemed like half of Deer Lodge and the surrounding ranches had turned out. There were tables laden with food, children running and playing, and a group of men tuning up fiddles and guitars for dancing later. Mrs. Chen found Nora immediately, embracing her with surprising warmth. You look well, Mrs. Chen said, studying her face. Better than when you arrived. The ranch life agrees with you, it does, and Mr. Zimmerman has been nothing but kind and respectful. I knew he would be, Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes moved between Nora and Ezra, who stood a few feet away talking to another rancher. But there is something wrong, I can see it. Nothing is wrong, Nora said quickly. Do not lie to an old woman. Come, sit with me and tell me the truth. They found a quiet corner, and Nora found herself pouring out the whole story. The evening ritual, the gentle brushing, the growing feelings she could not deny. The moment when he had asked what the truth was, and she had failed to speak it. Foolish girl, Mrs. Chen said, but her tone was affectionate. You are both dancing around each other like scared rabbits. Someone must be brave. What if he does not feel the same? What if I speak and he sends me away? And what if he does feel the same and you both remain silent and miserable? Life is too short for cowardice, Nora, especially out here. This land does not forgive hesitation. Before Nora could respond, a commotion erupted near the door. A well-dressed man had entered, and several people were greeting him with enthusiasm. Nora recognized him with a jolt of shock. It was Hendricks, the man who had rejected her in Butt. She stood automatically, wanting to disappear before he saw her, but it was too late. His eyes swept the room and landed on her, and his face twisted with surprise and something uglier. He crossed the room toward her, and Nora felt panic rising in her throat. But before he reached her, Ezra stepped between them, his body blocking Hendricks' path. That is close enough, Ezra said quietly. Hendricks looked at him with irritation. I just want a word with the lady. The lady does not want a word with you. Ezra's voice was still quiet, but there was steel in it now. Is this the one you have living out at your place, Zimmerman? I heard talk. The mail-order bride I sent away and you took her in. Playing at charity, are you? What you played at is no concern of mine. But if you speak to Miss Whitmore with anything but respect, we will have a problem. A circle had formed around them, people watching with undisguised interest. Hendrix's face flushed red. "She came west on my ticket, answered my advertisement. I had every right to refuse her when she did not meet my standards." "Your standards," Ezra said, and now there was contempt in his voice. "You mean your vanity. You wanted a pretty doll for your shelf, not a partner." "You are not fit to shine Miss Whitmore's shoes, Hendrix, and if you ever speak ill of her again, you will answer to me." For a moment, it looked like Hendrix might throw a punch. Then he seemed to notice the expressions of the people around them, several of the men nodding in agreement with Ezra, and he backed down. "Keep her then," he spat. "She is not worth the trouble anyway." He stalked out, and the crowd slowly dispersed, buzzing with gossip. Ezra turned to Nora, his face tight with anger that was not directed at her. "Are you all right?" "Yes, thank you. You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "We should go. I have heard enough gossip for one day." They rode home in silence as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. When they reached the ranch, Ezra helped Nora down from the wagon and began unhitching the horses. Nora stood in the yard, watching him work, and Mrs. Chen's words echoed in her head. "Life is too short for cowardice." "Ezra," she said. He looked up from the harness. "That day you asked me what the truth was, and I hid behind words about housekeeping and gratitude. I have been a coward, but I am trying not to be one now." She took a breath. "The truth is that I have fallen in love with you. I do not know when it happened exactly. Maybe it was the first night when you brushed my hair with such gentleness. Maybe it was later in one of our evening conversations. But it has happened, and I cannot pretend otherwise anymore. If that makes you uncomfortable, if you want me to leave, I will understand, but I had to tell you." Ezra stood very still, the harness forgotten in his hands. Then he carefully set it aside and crossed the yard to stand in front of her. "Nora Whitmore," he said, his voice rough. "I have been in love with you since the day you sat at my kitchen table and told me you needed honest work, and I saw the courage in your eyes. Every evening when I brush your hair, it takes all my strength not to kiss you. Every morning when I leave the house, I count the hours until I can come back to you. I did not speak because I was afraid. I hired you as my housekeeper, and I did not want you to feel obligated or trapped. I wanted you to choose freely if you chose at all." "I choose you," Nora whispered. "I choose you." He cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs brushing her cheekbones, and he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, and then deeper as she wound her arms around his neck and pressed close. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was exactly what he had been searching for his whole life. And Nora felt something break open inside her, all the pain and rejection and loneliness flooding away. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ezra rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you," he said. "Not because I need a housekeeper, but because I love you and I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me, Nora?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes." He kissed her again, lifting her clear off her feet, and when he set her down they were both grinning like fools. The horses stamped and snorted, impatient for their dinner, and they broke apart laughing. "I should finish with the horses," Ezra said, "and I should start supper." But neither of them moved, too caught up in looking at each other in the joy of finally speaking what they had both been feeling. "Your hair," Ezra said, reaching out to touch it. "I will brush it every evening for the rest of our lives if you want." "I want," Nora said. "I want all of it. The evenings and the mornings and everything in between." They married 3 weeks later in the small church in Deer Lodge, with Mrs. Chen and the ranch hands as witnesses. Nora wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and Ezra wore his Sunday suit and looked impossibly handsome. The preacher performed a brief ceremony, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Ezra kissed Nora with such thorough enthusiasm that several people in the small congregation laughed. They held a celebration at the ranch afterward, with neighbors and friends coming from miles around. There was music and dancing, and Nora found herself twirled around the yard by one partner after another while Ezra looked on, his eyes never leaving her. When the sun began to set and people started to leave, Ezra finally reclaimed his wife, pulling her into a slow dance while Tom played a soft waltz on his fiddle. "Happy," Ezra murmured against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible. Good. Because I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." After the last guests had departed and Tom and Billy had retreated to their cabin, Ezra and Nora stood together on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. "I can hardly believe this is my life now," Nora said softly. 2 months ago, I was standing on a train platform in Butte, rejected and alone and terrified. And now I am here, married to a man I love with a home and a future." "We both were given a gift," Ezra said. "Hendrix was a fool to turn you away, but his foolishness brought you to me. I cannot regret that." He took her hand and led her inside, to the bedroom that was now theirs together. And later, as Nora lay in his arms, her hair spread across the pillow like silk, Ezra ran his fingers through it gently, and she felt safe and loved and home at last. The seasons turned. Autumn gave way to winter, and the ranch settled into the quiet rhythms of cold weather. Snow came early that year, blanketing the mountains and meadows in white, and the cattle huddled in sheltered valleys. Ezra taught Nora to read the weather, to know when a storm was coming by the smell of the air and the behavior of the horses. They spent long evenings by the fire, Ezra reading aloud while Nora sewed or knitted, their legs tangled together under a shared blanket. Every evening, without fail, Ezra brushed Nora's hair. It had become more than a practical necessity. It was a ritual of love, a way of caring for each other at the end of a long day. Sometimes they talked while he brushed. Sometimes they were silent. But always, his touch was gentle and reverent, and Nora felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. Winter deepened, and with it came challenges. One of the ranch hands, Billy, broke his arm in a fall, and Nora nursed him through the injury with patience and competence. A wolf pack began harassing the cattle, and Ezra spent several sleepless nights on patrol before finally tracking them to their den and scaring them off the property. The work was hard and sometimes dangerous, but they faced it together, and their partnership grew stronger with each challenge met. In February, Nora realized she was carrying a child. She waited until she was certain before telling Ezra, and when she finally spoke the words over breakfast one morning, his face transformed with such pure joy that she felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby," he said, his voice wondering. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his face. Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "You have given me everything, Nora, everything I did not even know I was missing." He became even more protective after that, insisting she rest more, taking on household chores she had always handled. Nora protested but secretly loved the way he fussed over her, the way his hands would rest on her growing belly with such tenderness. Spring came slowly to Montana, the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing the brown grass beneath. As the world thawed and greened, Nora's belly swelled, and she moved through the house with the particular grace of women in late pregnancy, one hand always resting on her back. The baby came in late September, on a morning when the aspen trees were at their peak of gold and the air smelled of wood smoke and frost. Mrs. Chen arrived 2 days before, summoned by Ezra, who was taking no chances with his wife's safety. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and when the baby finally arrived with a lusty cry, Mrs. Chen placed a red-faced, squalling son in Nora's arms. "A boy," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Ezra, we have a son." Ezra was at her side instantly, his own eyes wet as he looked down at the tiny person they had created. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much." They named him Samuel, after Ezra's father. He had dark hair like his father and green eyes that Nora swore could see straight into her soul. Ezra was besotted from the first moment, holding his son with infinite care, talking to him in a low, gentle voice about the ranch and the mountains and all the things they would do together when Sam was older. The first year of parenthood was exhausting and joyful in equal measure. Sam was a good baby, healthy and curious, and he grew quickly. Nora marveled at the way Ezra took to fatherhood, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor at night when Sam was fussy, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always worked. Through it all, the evening ritual continued. Even on the nights when they were both exhausted from caring for a teething baby, Ezra would take out the wooden box and brush Nora's hair with the same patient gentleness as always. It was their anchor, that quiet time together, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. 2 years after Sam was born, a daughter arrived. They named her Clara after Ezra's mother, and she had Nora's auburn hair and a determination that suggested she would not be ignored. Sam adored his little sister, hovering over her cradle and bringing her his favorite toys, and Ezra looked at his growing family with such pride that it made Nora's heart ache. The ranch prospered. With Nora's help, Ezra was able to expand his herd and improve his breeding stock. They built a new barn and a larger chicken coop, and Nora's kitchen garden flourished, providing vegetables that she canned for winter. Tom and Billy stayed on, loyal and hardworking, and a third hand was hired to help with the increased workload. The Zimmerman Ranch became known throughout the territory for its quality cattle and fair dealings, and Ezra's reputation as an honest man brought steady business. But more than the material success, it was the life they built together that mattered. The evenings by the fire with the children playing at their feet, the Sunday picnics by the creek in summer, the way Sam learned to ride on a gentle old mare, his father walking beside him with a hand on his back, the way Clara toddled after the chickens, shrieking with laughter when they ran away. The 1,000 small moments that made a family. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ezra took Nora on a ride up into the mountains to a meadow he had discovered years before. It was late spring, and the meadow was carpeted with wildflowers, blue and yellow and white, swaying in the breeze. They spread a blanket and lay side by side, looking up at the sky. "Do you remember the first time I brushed your hair?" Ezra asked. "Of course. I remember everything about that night. I was so nervous and you were so gentle. I think that was when I started to fall in love with you, though I did not recognize it at the time." "I knew that night," Ezra said. "I looked at your hair, all tangled and matted, and I thought about how life had knotted you up, all the pain and rejection and struggle. And I wanted to smooth it all away. I wanted to make everything better for you." "You did," Nora said, rolling onto her side to face him. "You made everything better. You took a woman who thought she was worthless and showed her that she was precious. You gave me love when I thought I was unlovable. You were always worthy of love, Nora, always. I just got to be the lucky man who proved it to you." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I will keep proving it to you every day for the rest of our lives. I know. And I will spend every day thanking God that Hendrix was a fool and Mrs. Chen was wise and you needed a housekeeper." She smiled. "It is the strangest path to happiness, but I would not change a single step of it. They lay in the meadow for hours, talking and dreaming, making plans for the future. They spoke of adding on to the house, of buying the adjacent property that had come up for sale, of sending Sam to school in Deer Lodge when he was old enough. They spoke of small things and large, weaving together the fabric of their shared life. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they rode back down the mountain to their ranch, to their children waiting with Mrs. Chen, who had come to watch them for the day, to their home that was full of love and laughter and promise. That evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Ezra took out the wooden box. Nora sat in her chair, and he began to brush her hair, long, smooth strokes from root to tip. Her hair was still the color of autumn leaves, though now a few silver threads were beginning to appear at her temples. Ezra brushed them all with the same care, every strand precious to him. "I love you," he said softly. "More now than the day we married, more than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "I love you too," Nora replied. "My patient, gentle rancher, my home." The years continued to roll past, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, cattle lost to wolves and illness, crops that failed and crops that flourished. There were accidents and near misses, times of plenty and times of scarcity. But through it all, Ezra and Nora faced the world together, their love the bedrock on which everything else was built. Sam grew into a strong, capable young man, working the ranch alongside his father, and learning the land with the same reverence Ezra had learned from his parents. Clara proved to have her grandmother's sharp mind and her mother's determination, and she could rope a calf as well as any ranch hand by the time she was 12. 3 more children came over the years, 2 more boys and another girl, and the house rang with the noise and chaos of a large, happy family. Ezra kept his promise. Every evening, no matter how tired he was, no matter what the day had brought, he brushed Nora's hair. It became the stuff of family legend, the children sneaking glances at their parents during this private ritual, understanding without being told that it was something special, something sacred. As they grew older and had their own families, they would remember those evenings, the gentle rasp of the brush, the way their father's face softened when he looked at their mother, the palpable love in that quiet moment. The town of Deer Lodge grew and changed over the decades. The railroad brought new people and new opportunities. The Montana Territory became the state of Montana in 1889, and Ezra took Nora to the celebrations in the capital, the two of them marveling at how much had changed since they had first met. But through all the change, their love remained constant. Mrs. Chen remained a close friend, visiting often and eventually moving to a small cottage on the Zimmerman property when she grew too old to run her boarding house. She lived to see all of Ezra and Nora's children grow up, and she liked to take credit for their happiness. "I knew," she would say, her old eyes twinkling. "From the very first, I knew you two belonged together." As the years passed, Nora's hair turned from auburn to silver, but it remained long and beautiful, and Ezra still brushed it every evening with the same devotion as that first night. His hands developed arthritis as he aged, but he worked through the stiffness, refusing to give up this ritual that had sustained them through decades of marriage. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. The whole territory seemed to turn out, friends and neighbors and family, gathering to honor the couple who had built such a strong life together. There was music and dancing and far too much food, and as the sun set, Ezra led Nora in a slow dance while everyone watched. 40 years, Nora said, her head on his shoulder. "Can you believe it? Best 40 years of my life, Ezra replied, and I look forward to 40 more. We will be ancient. Then we will be ancient together. They danced until the stars came out, and their children and grandchildren looked on and saw what real love looked like. Not the passionate romance of storybooks, though there had been plenty of passion over the years, but something deeper and more enduring. A love built on daily acts of kindness and care, on patience and gentleness, on choosing each other over and over again through all the seasons of life. Eventually, as all lives must, theirs began to wind down. Ezra's steps grew slower, and he handed over more of the ranch work to Sam, who ran it with the same integrity his father had shown. Nora's hands grew stiff with age, but she still kept her garden, still cooked the meals her family loved, still welcomed grandchildren and great-grandchildren with open arms. But every evening, without fail, Ezra would take out the wooden box. His hands shook now with age, and sometimes Nora had to help him hold the brush. But together, they maintained the ritual that had defined their marriage. Her hair was pure silver now, fine and soft, and he brushed it with infinite tenderness, each stroke a declaration of love that needed no words. On a cool evening in late September, 52 years after they first met, Nora sat in her chair and Ezra stood behind her with the brush. It was their anniversary, and the house was quiet, most of the family having left after a day of celebration. Sam was in town with his own wife, and they were alone. "Do you remember the first time I did this?" Ezra asked, his voice wavering slightly with age. "Of course. You saved me that night in more ways than one. You saved my hair, but more than that, you saved me. You showed me I was worth saving." "You saved me too," Ezra said. "I was just existing before you came, going through the motions. You gave me life again. You gave me everything." He finished brushing and set the brush carefully in the box. Then he came around and knelt in front of her chair, his old knees creaking, and took her hands in his. "I have loved you every day of our marriage," he said. "Every single day. And I will love you beyond this life into whatever comes next." "I know," Nora whispered, tears streaming down her lined face. "I know, my love, and I will find you there wherever there is. We are not done yet, you and I." They sat together in the lamplight, hands clasped. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life of beauty and meaning. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon, the same wild song that had accompanied their first nights together all those years ago. The years that remained to them were precious and few, but they lived them fully, surrounded by the family they had created and the love they had nurtured for more than 5 decades. When Ezra finally passed in his sleep at the age of 82, with Nora's hand in his, the whole territory mourned a man who had been honest and kind, who had treated every person with respect and every animal with care, who had loved his wife with a devotion that had become legendary. Nora lived 3 more years, long enough to see her youngest great-grandchild born, long enough to pass on the stories of the early days to a new generation. She kept the wooden box with the brush and comb on her dresser, and sometimes her children would find her holding it, tears streaming down her face, lost in memories of lamplight and gentle hands. When she finally passed, quietly and peacefully in the same bedroom where she had first arrived as a frightened, rejected mail-order bride, her children found a letter she had written to be read at her funeral. In it, she told the story of her arrival in Montana, of the kind Chinese woman who had taken her in, of the rancher who had needed a housekeeper and had given her so much more. She wrote of knotted hair and patient hands, of love growing slowly and steadily like the aspens on the mountain, and of a life that had been richer and fuller than anything she had dared to dream when she stepped off that stage in Deer Lodge 55 years before. They buried her next to Ezra on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with the mountains rising blue and majestic in the distance. The whole family gathered, 3 generations of Zimmermans, all of them products of the love between a rejected mail-order bride and a lonely rancher who had found each other at exactly the right moment. Sam, now an old man himself, stood at the graveside and spoke of his parents' love, of the evening ritual he had witnessed throughout his childhood, of the lesson they had taught him about what marriage could be when built on kindness and patience and daily acts of devotion. "My father used to say that love was in the small things," Sam said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Not grand gestures, but daily choices. Every evening when he brushed my mother's hair, he was choosing her. He was saying, without words, that she mattered, that she was worth his time and care, that he would be gentle with her heart, just as he was gentle with her hair. They taught us all what it means to truly love someone, not just in the easy times, but through everything life brings. And their love will live on in every one of us who carries their blood and their lessons." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the family said their final goodbyes. But it was not really an ending. The love that Ezra and Nora had built lived on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the ranch that still bore the Zimmerman name, in the stories that would be told for generations about the rejected bride and the gentle rancher who had saved each other. The wooden box with the brush and comb was passed down to Clara, Ezra and Nora's eldest daughter, and she kept it on her own dresser, telling her own daughters and granddaughters the story of how a simple act of kindness, repeated every evening for 52 years, had been the foundation of a great love. The brush itself became a family treasure, a tangible reminder that love is built not in moments but in consistency, not in grand declarations but in gentle daily care. Years later, visitors to the Zimmerman ranch would see the 2 graves on the hillside and ask about the couple buried there. And the current generation of Zimmermans would tell the story, always beginning the same way. It started with tangled hair and a man patient enough to work through the knots. And they would speak of love and second chances, of finding home in unexpected places, and of the power of gentleness to heal even the deepest wounds. The ranch continued to prosper, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the family story. But at the heart of it all remained the example set by Ezra and Nora, the understanding that true partnership was built on daily acts of love, on seeing the worth in another person even when the world had declared them worthless, on choosing tenderness over harshness, patience over frustration, commitment over convenience. In Deer Lodge, now a thriving town with paved streets and electric lights, the older residents still remembered the Zimmermans and would share stories with anyone who asked. They spoke of Ezra's quiet integrity, of Nora's strength and grace, of a marriage that had been a beacon of what love could be. The boarding house where Nora had first stayed was long gone, but a historical marker stood on the site, telling part of the story. Mrs. Chen's cottage, preserved as a piece of history, became a reminder of the role that kindness and wisdom had played in bringing 2 lonely people together. The story of Ezra and Nora Zimmerman became woven into the fabric of Montana history, a tale told alongside stories of gold rushes and cattle drives, of harsh winters survived and new lives built. But unlike many frontier stories of hardship and loss, theirs was fundamentally a story of hope, of love found and nurtured, of 2 people who had been given a second chance and had seized it with both hands. The mountains still stood watch over the Zimmerman ranch, unchanging while generations lived and died below. The creek still ran silver through the meadow. The aspen still turned gold every autumn, painting the hillsides with color. And on quiet evenings when the wind was right, some of the Zimmermans swore they could feel the presence of their ancestors, the gentle love that had founded their family still echoing through the land. The wooden box with the brush and comb passed eventually to one of the great-great-grandchildren, a young woman named Nora, named for her ancestor. She kept it on her dresser in her own home in Deer Lodge, and when her fiancé asked about it, she told him the story. And on their wedding night, he asked if he could brush her hair, wanting to honor the tradition that had meant so much to the family he was marrying into. And so the ritual lived on, adapted and renewed for a new generation, the same gentle care passed down through the decades. The tale of the rejected bride and the rancher who brushed her hair every evening became more than just a family story. It became a part of Montana's heritage, a reminder that the West was built not just on courage and determination, but also on love and gentleness, on people caring for each other in the midst of a harsh and unforgiving land. It was taught in local schools as an example of frontier life, written about in historical journals, referenced in wedding ceremonies throughout the territory. But perhaps the most important legacy was the lesson it taught about second chances and the power of simple, consistent love. Nora had come west rejected and alone, convinced of her own unworthiness. Ezra had been trapped in grief and isolation, going through the motions of life without really living. Together, they had found redemption and joy, not through any grand gesture or dramatic rescue, but through daily acts of care and kindness, through patience and gentleness, through choosing each other over and over again in the small moments that made up a life. Their story proved that love need not be complicated or dramatic to be profound. That sometimes the most powerful expressions of love are the quietest ones. That a man brushing his wife's hair every evening for 52 years speaks more deeply of devotion than any number of sonnets or grand romantic gestures. That true love is found not in the butterflies of new attraction, but in the steady commitment to care for another person through all the seasons of life. And so the story lived on, passed from parent to child, told at family gatherings and recorded in journals, painted in the memories of those who had witnessed that great love firsthand. It lived in the ranch that still stood, in the graves on the hillside, in the wooden box with its precious brush and comb. But most of all, it lived in the hearts of those who heard the tale and were inspired to love more gently, more patiently, more faithfully. The rejected bride had found her home, not in spite of her rejection, but because of it, because it had brought her to exactly the right place at exactly the right time. The lonely rancher had found his purpose again, not just in working the land, but in loving the woman who had stumbled into his life with her knotted hair and wounded heart. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting, a love that transcended their own lives and became a gift to everyone who came after them. And that, in the end, was the true miracle of their story. Not that they had found each other, though that was remarkable enough, but that their love had been so genuine, so grounded in daily acts of care and devotion, that it had rippled outward to touch countless other lives, inspiring generations to love better, to care more deeply, to see the sacred in the everyday rituals of partnership and commitment. The sun set over the Montana mountains, as it had for millennia and would for millennia more. The seasons turned, bringing their cycle of growth and dormancy, of challenge and renewal. And somewhere in the midst of all that vast and timeless landscape, the love of Ezra and Nora Zimmerman continued to shine, a small but steadfast light, a reminder that even the most wounded heart can heal, that even the most tangled knots can be worked free with patience and care, and that love, when tended faithfully day after day, can build something strong enough to last not just a lifetime, but generations beyond.